So here's a video to explain the pre-reading activity of Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. So we also went over this in class, but if you missed class, I'm going to go ahead and explain it now. So this is what your student copy should look like. The first slide has an instructional video that kind of explains the whole assignment and how we're going to go through this unit. The essential question is, how does the setting impact the plot? So the first thing for the pre-reading activity you do is you watch this short video about life in the 50s. So it talks kind of about how after World War II, America was just kind of afraid that another war like that could happen again. They wanted to settle down, have a family, so the American dream sort of sparked where they would have a couple kids and own a home. They came out of a depression, so a lot of people started to buy their first home. This is kind of just what this video is about. And then next, you're going to read this article. There is a read-along link where I'm reading it with you on the article. And then answer, after you read the article, there's two terms, communism and alliance. And we have the actual definition on the first part of the slide, and then we put the definition in our own words on the second half of the slide. So two terms that you're going to need to know, communism and alliance. Communism is a political theory. It is not a system of government because it hasn't been successful in any nation, so it's not necessarily a system, it's only a theory. Advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. So in class, we discussed that our own words, how to put that longer definition into our own words. It would be a political theory where everything is owned or by everyone. So average citizens kind of share property. They are paid according to their abilities and needs. And so alliance. We also talked about alliance in the beginning of the year when we did our vocabulary. And so our longer definition is a union or association formed for mutual benefit. And so our version is groups of people joining forces for their own benefit. So just make sure that you have these two definitions copied down on your document. This slide is kind of a photo collage of popular things that people did in the 50s. So they used to go to malt shops where they would have milkshakes, and it was like old 50s looking diners. They had jukeboxes. They would go to drive-ins on the weekends. There was also segregation, so they had different bathrooms, water fountains, and television was new. So one of the first major shows was American Bandstand. Elvis was very popular. He was kind of the most popular musician. And then James Dean was a famous actor. And I forgot this guy's name, but he's in a reading that we talked about. And then they used to have like these health classes where they would show films about how to be appropriate in society, which is kind of different. And so we went over these questions in class. These questions you got directly from the reading. So what two countries were involved in the Cold War? Our reading is right here. And it says the United States and the Soviet Union competed with each other for international influence and allies. And so those are the two countries that were involved in the Cold War. What were the causes of the Cold War? In our reading, it doesn't necessarily point it out, but it says after World War II, there were competition. Countries attempted to gain international power by influencing other governments in their favor. So we kind of talked about in class how there was distrust globally because World War II had just ended like 10 years before. So people were terrified that it could happen again. So World War II is definitely a big factor. The creation of nuclear weapons and power was a big factor, and fear of influence and power, and then competition between other allies. So those are all sort of causes of that. The nuclear bomb was created, and then people were terrified, thinking that, well, if Hitler just rose to power, took over the majority of Europe, and then what if he had one of these weapons? And so they started fearing that it could happen again. NATO is an organization that was created in order to basically put up safeguards so that this would never happen again. So in the third paragraph, it talks about NATO. 1949, Western nations formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. This alliance provided its members with mutual defense against a possible attack by the Soviet Union or any other aggressor. So in your answers, I put exactly that sentence from the text. This alliance provided its members with mutual defense against a possible attack by the Soviet Union or any other aggressor. So what are some characteristics of the Cold War? I got this from the very beginning of the reading, where it says, maybe not, maybe second paragraph, yeah, the Cold War was characterized by mutual distrust, suspicion, and misunderstandings between two sides. It led to confrontations. It also, the Cold War, there were no actual bombs thrown during the Cold War. That's kind of why it's called cold. But there were little pockets of wars that happened because of the Cold War, so like the Korean War, Vietnam, the situation in Cuba. So those are things that happened because of the Cold War. Yeah, Cold War was characterized by mutual distrust, suspicion, and misunderstandings between the two sides. So what are some effects of McCarthyism? So at the very end of your article, it talks about McCarthyism. That is a senator at the time, Wisconsin Republican senator, who is credited for that term. He charged that many individuals were communists or communist sympathizers, or a sympathizer is more of like a ally or a friend of the communists. So usually with little evidence to support his charges. Nevertheless, many of those people lost their jobs and or suffered in other ways after being labeled a communist. So we talked about the effects of McCarthyism was that many people lost their jobs and suffered in other ways. It was almost like neighbors were accusing their neighbors of being a communist, and if they did, it wasn't just as simple they would not be friends anymore. They would literally lose their jobs. So those are some of the effects. All right, and then our second task for the pre-reading activity was to analyze this cartoon. So we said, it says list two important objects in the cartoon and describe what each represents. First one we said was the Statue of Liberty, and you guys said that it represents freedom or justice. And then the other objects we could have talked about would be the ladder, the man, or the water bucket. And we talked about the man because he has the word hysteria written on his leg. So he represents fear or hysteria. And the issue or event that the cartoon is portraying is the Cold War. So he represents mass panic and hysteria. The majority of Americans felt this way after World War II, during the Cold War. And so he's going up to the top of the Statue of Liberty yelling fire with a bucket. This kind of symbolized the hysteria of Americans towards communism. And almost in a way, the message is hysteria will put out our liberty and freedom. And so anytime you're looking at political cartoons, you have to think about the message objectively. So you have to think about what the author is trying to get across. So because he has a man who is in mass panic or fear, carrying water, he's trying to put out the fire, which represents liberty, of the Statue of Liberty. It's kind of saying that Americans are almost their worst enemy, right? Hysteria and fear will cause them to turn against each other and accuse each other of communism, of being a communist sympathizer. And then, yeah. And so this fear will sort of be the end of freedom and liberty. All right. Well, that is how you complete the first couple slides of your assignment this week. Thank you. Bye.